Right, it's 6 o'clock, so we can make a start. And I will welcome you to the Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance and Governance Committee meeting being held today, 22nd of October. My name is Councillor Adrian Bamford and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded by the council for live broadcast on its YouTube channel and for training purposes. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until these issues are resolved. Well, it says here if members of the public are present, but do I count Alicia as a member of the public? That is the first question for the committee.
No.
No, right, okay. Sorry about that. Can I ask everyone to speak clearly when addressing the meeting and that officers introduce themselves when they speak? Item number 1, apologies, or are we a full house? Full house, excellent. I'm now going to invite members to declare any interests they have on any of the agenda items. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to put it on record that one of the internal audit progress report items concerns the ward that I represent and the planning application therein. So whilst I don't have a personal interest or prejudicial interest, I just want to put for the record that I have been supporting constituents with that matter. Okay, thanks.
A show of hands if you accept the minutes, please. Councillor Took. Oh, you weren't here. Sorry about that. Right, okay, so that's 4-0 and 5-0. And here are the minutes that I will pass along the table. It's duly signed. The next item is public and member questions. I don't think I've received any. I don't think any. We haven't got any, have we? No. So that's none of those. And so that moves us straight on to our external auditor report, our external auditor for 22-23, Grant Thornton, and item 5. So there's effectively four sections here, really. Before I get Peter to go through his report, can we look at these number 5, 5A and 5B, if you like, separately as a committee, and starting with number 5, the letter to Paul from Grant Thornton about the backstop, effectively, and how we might recover from the situation whereby we've effectively got unaudited accounts for 22-3 at the moment in the future. And I'll start, if it's all right, Peter, by asking you a question. On the second page of that, it says, to help us meet the requirements of the backstop, please ensure you have, and there's 3 bullet points there. And I suppose the first question is, are you comfortable that we have those? As it seems to me we do. Is that, I'd like to record that if that's okay, that the external auditors are happy that we've complied with those 3 points. Is there anything else you want to say on that, Peter, about that letter?
Only, Chair, that obviously item 5 is a bumper pack, and as you say, there's a 5, there's a 5A, there's a 5B and a 5C. So 5A is a letter dated September. And at that point, I hadn't confirmed with Paul the exact timing of this committee and whether we would bring the detail to this committee. So as you say, that first item, item 5, which is on page 11 of the paper pack, really just sets out, and it's been well trailed, hasn't it, at this committee over many months, the approach to backstopping the audit. And then the subsequent items that we'll discuss in due course are the actual detailed reports that we need to bring to this committee as those charged with governance to enable us to conclude 22-23. But Chair, absolutely, for the record, in terms of what you're required to do and what you'll see as committee members at item 6 is the accounts. So you're required to produce accounts to enable me to backstop them, and you've done that under item 6. You need to have publicly enabled them to be inspected, and you've done that as well. And then obviously we need a committee meeting where you are formally approving those accounts, and this meeting does that. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm reassured by that. I don't know whether any of the committee members want to comment on that, or I'll move on to 5A otherwise. Councillor Day.
I don't know if now is the right time to comment on that, given we've got sort of A, B, C, D, but...
Specifically on this, on the letter and the contents of it, if
No,
there's anything.
that's okay. That's fine.
Right, well, let's move on then to agenda item 5A, which is the auditor's report to the members on our financial statements. And if I can make some comments on this, and then we'll have a general discussion. In the first section on the disclaimer, and on the disclaimer, I always knew there was going to be a disclaimer. I didn't realise until recently that we would have made as little progress as some of these papers suggest. And I think maybe between yourselves and Bishop Fleming, the situation will resolve itself seamlessly. But in this committee, I just want to cover off any thoughts that there is a problem that we haven't been able to resolve because of something we're not doing, if that makes sense. So that brings me on to the first paragraph, the disclaimer. And it says here, we've not been able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to provide a basis for an audit opinion. Now, what I'm hoping going to say is that's because there's not been time, there's not been resource, rather than we have been negligent in providing you with something. Is that clear? Yeah.
Yep. So absolutely. So just to be clear again, 5A is the auditor's opinion, the subject to the meeting today, and government legislation being passed next month. This will be the auditor's opinion that appears in the final set of your 22-23 accounts. And the disclaimer wording that you've referred to, Chair, is absolutely the default wording that will be included in many sets of accounts across the country in due course. And the reference to not being able to obtain sufficient assurance is purely down to the fact of capacity on both sides to actually get the work done before the deadline of the 13th of December. So there's not been anybody being obstructive or preventing us from accessing the information we need. It was just in discussion with Paul and yourselves, it was agreed some time ago that we weren't going to get there for this particular year.
Just briefly looking in this direction, just in case anybody wants to come in at this point, in which case I'll move us on to the basis for the disclaimer opinion. And we've got here, this enables the authority to comply with the requirements of the regulations, as you mentioned, Peter, that they publish audited financial statements for the year end 31st March 23 by the backstop date. Well, as I understand it, we have. So I'm not quite sure why that statement therefore is in here when we already have. You see what I mean?
So this was just being clear in terms of articulating, in order to enact the backstop, these are the requirements. And clearly, in discussion with Paul ahead of this meeting, we were both in agreement and clear that those had all been achieved and met. Ultimately, the accounts are being reapproved this evening, that's my understanding. So that clearly, those approved accounts is part of the requirements to enable me to issue this backstopped opinion.
thanks. So we can just clearly minute that the auditor is comfortable that we have met that requirement, although still this document is still valid per se. Right then, moving swiftly on, only one paragraph there. So the annual governance statement. Are you saying that you haven't got a view on our annual governance statement, or that you're comfortable with it?
The first. So clearly, in terms of the quantum of work we've done on your statements, and your financial statements include the annual governance statement, we have not undertaken any work on the numbers within the accounts and the primary statements and the notes, and we've done no work on the annual governance statement. We could have agreed with yourselves to undertake some work, but clearly, unless we've done the totality of an audit, there would have been some form of disclaimer. We just felt it was more simple and straightforward to not undertake any work, you know, and our AGS work is normally limited to compliance with the requirements of the code and whether it's consistent with our knowledge, but we've not done any work on that either, hence the disclaimer in the opinion.
Thanks, Peter. And presumably that doesn't leave you with any particular problems. Okay, right. Thanks very much. That's very helpful. Right. So this section covers pages 13 to 16. And you often refer to the fact that we have nothing to report in respect of the above matters. That can I just be assured that that's not a negative about those matters? It's simply, again, as we just discussed earlier, that there hasn't been the sufficient time, resource, etc., on one side or both sides to draw a conclusion.
Yes, Chair. I mean, nothing to report is positive in this respect. So clearly, in terms of the role of the external auditor, unlike the private sector where it purely is about the financial statements and whether the accounts give a true and fair view of an organisation, within the public sector, as you all know, it's got absolutely that role, but it's also got the value for money role as well. So the value for money role of our responsibilities has been completed. So you'll recall back in, I think it was March meeting of this committee, we presented the auditor's annual report. So within this opinion that you've got at item 5A, you've got the disclaimers around the accounts, but you've also got us considering whether there's anything we need to report in terms of value for money, and we don't, because there was no significant weaknesses identified, but it also requires us within the opinion to talk about some of our wider powers like public interest reports, statute recs, etc. And obviously where we're referring to, we've got nothing to report in these areas. That is positive assurance for this committee.
Excellent, thanks for that. I think that's all I had on that section 5A. So again, over to members if they've got any queries or questions for Peter on that section. No, good. Gemma, are you okay there? If I move on to 5B. And this is the letter to me. Thank you for that. Do you want to sort of briefly introduce why and what you expect, how you expect us to, or me to respond? Okay,
so item 5B, which begins on page 17 of your papers, is the audit findings letter. I call it a letter. It's an audit findings report, but for the more longer standing members of this committee, you'll be aware that in prior years, these have been considerably longer and set out the detailed findings from our audit of your accounts. Given the fact that we haven't done any real detailed testing on them, this is a much abbreviated version of our findings, which in theory you would use as a committee to inform your decision to adopt the accounts at item 6. So as I said, it's a very reduced summary of the normal report that we would issue. Within the report, it talks about the fact that we've done the extent to which we've done work in terms of the accounts, and very little, but it also refers, as I've just mentioned as part of the previous item, the fact that we've done that VFM work and we've reported, and it talks about some of the independence and other issues that we need to cover, along with an indication of the potential fee, subject to PSAA approval, having concluded the audit hopefully next month. So once again, Chair, I'm hoping it's reasonably straightforward and self-explanatory, but happy to take any questions on the detail.
Thanks, Peter. So my understanding is that you've discussed this through with Paul and with Gemma, and they're comfortable with where we've got to in that regard. And I think we can summarise that probably in the minutes. But before I move on to 5C again, are there any questions? Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. So on page 28, there's the use of auditors' powers list of items. And I know some of those could be triggered by, for example, a member of the public inspecting the records and then making a complaint to you. If that had happened for the accounts that are subject to the backstop, would that have been reported? So can we take the no powers used as a fact that nobody has come and said, I have a concern about this and what have you?
Through you, Chair, if I may. Absolutely. The accounts were produced some time ago. The inspection period has come and gone. I have not received any communication from any member of the public in relation to the accounts.
Thanks. Any other questions at this stage? So just one final one from me. Oh, sorry.
Just an observation that it seems quite a lot of money for not very much. I'm tempted to quote Shakespeare and say it's kind of much ado about nothing, and I'm hoping that all's well that ends well, really, with this.
Well, as it happens, that was my final question on this.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, in terms of just to be very clear, we're required to give an indication of the fee, and the fee is a fraction of what would be charged in a normal year and was charged in the prior year. And just to remind members of the committee, you will recall that in March you did receive our auditor's annual report that went into some detail about the arrangements that the council has in place to ensure value for money that is now an ever-increasing element of the responsibilities of the auditors, and based on the new NAO code does take considerably longer than it used to, and that work has been completed in full. And clearly, in order to sign off the accounts, even with limited work done, we still need to jump through certain hoops to get to that final opinion. So that is an indicative fee, but the final fee, importantly, will just be subject to sign off and approval by public sector audit appointments. And they will, as they always do, seek from us evidence to support any time charged to the audit.
I suppose my concern there is more of a management accounting one, in the sense that it seemed like a lot of money, and that I would imagine we will still have to resource Bishop's Fleming for quite a lot of work in that year. And so that therefore my concern would be, are we likely to incur considerably more cost in that financial year than we anticipated? I suppose that's not a question for you, obviously, Peter. So that's a question for...
So I think at the moment we are unclear.
And a lack of clarity about these things is always a problem for us. So that, I think that's why we're talking about this item at this stage. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. So would you acknowledge that in terms of whatever fee is finally agreed in respect to 2023, I mean, your firm is taking sort of very limited, if any, audit risk because of the disclaimer of opinion. You know, you're not signing off the accounts. And just will that be reflected in whatever fee is finally agreed?
Through you, Chair, if I may. So there is ongoing dialogue between all the firms where backstop opinions are like to be issued and public sector audit appointments about the basis of the recharge and how the final fee is arrived at. An interesting reference to risk, because you know, the VFM conclusions that we give are equally sensitive to risk, and dare I say, in many cases, more under greater scrutiny as part of press and adverse potential publicity. You'll be aware from the press of, you know, a much increased cases of statutory recommendations and public interest reports being issued by auditors, and a lot of value for money conclusions are being qualified in terms of conclusions where the auditors are concluding that councils don't have arrangements in place in various areas. So there is risk involved in that, and there is a risk in giving an opinion, but we are comfortable that in both areas, when we do a full audit and when we do reach our final judgment in terms of that opinion, that it is based on a quality piece of work that we can support should it be challenged.
Thanks, Peter. And then in that case, we can go on to 5C. And I wonder if you could introduce your final report for us, and perhaps making sure that you home in on the recommendations, either one by one or depending on their seriousness, you might wish to skip certain. But if you could go through those as part of your discussion. Thanks.
I can, Chair. So I'm conscious that I think one of the questions that was raised as part of the previous item actually referred to page 28, I think, which is in this report, in terms of those statutory powers. So just to be very clear, this is the same report that was presented by myself to this committee back in March and discussed at length in terms of its content, its judgments, and the key recommendations. It was called an interim auditor's annual report in March, purely because I cannot call it a final one until I'm in a position to issue the opinion on the financial statements. So literally what I've done is I've taken that report from March 24, I've taken off the reference to interim, I've called it a final auditor's annual report, I've redated it, and I've provided it here again for information. But Chair, given that it was discussed in length at the meeting in March, is absolutely no different. Importantly for members of this committee, the auditor's annual report on VFM does not identify any significant weaknesses in arrangements in any of the three areas: financial sustainability, governance, or the 3 E's. So I wasn't minded to go into detail over those recommendations again, given that they've had a good airing previously, but I'm absolutely happy to elaborate if you think that's helpful.
Apologies for my short-term memory. Yes, I do recall now. I suppose the fact that they're now with us in a report, which Mike, that they're now with us though as recommendations and they express certain concerns. Can I say therefore how we minuted them back in March and the actions that were being taken to address them at that time have, as far as you're concerned, nothing has changed. We are at no worse a situation. These concerns haven't amplified in any way.
Chair, so just to be clear, so those judgments and those recommendations are based on our independent review of your arrangements for 23-24. So we're looking at the arrangements that are in place for that 12-month period. Clearly, it'd be for Bishop Fleming to articulate how they discharge their role going forward. But in terms of whether that position is deteriorated or improved or stays the same, that it will be probably, I assume, that will be followed up or at least considered as part of future years' work on VFM. But clearly that's not for me to determine. That would be Bishop Fleming to make that call.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. I suppose what I was just trying to cover off was the idea that somebody could come back to say, your audit committee, you were told this in March, and then you got it again in October, and you didn't give it proper consideration. I think what I'm understanding from this is that the consideration we gave it in March was sufficient, and we don't need to review all of that at this stage. But Bishops Fleming, as they work through, may wish to amplify or or indeed indicate that we've dealt with stuff. Perhaps that's a good opportunity to invite our new external auditor for a brief comment.
Good evening, everyone. I haven't even introduced myself yet at all. So I'm Nathan Coughlin. I'm external audit partner from Bishop Fleming. It's great to finally be here working with you. Yes, we'll pick it up in due course in our audit plan, but absolutely all these points will feed through into our risk assessment on our value for money work and our work programme. So we'll follow up all those findings and give comment on them in our report this year.
Thanks very much and welcome. I should have said that the first place, shouldn't I? Right, so Peter, is there anything else you'd like to comment or any other comments you want to make on your report? Thanks.
Not really, Chair, other than to say that if at the next item, clearly that will be about the accounts and it will also include reference to the letter of representation. So subject to you approving the accounts, signing the letter of representation, what I will then do is I then need to wait until legislation has been passed where the final NAO code is approved by government before I can apply the backstop. The deadline is the 13th of December. We anticipate that that legislation will be passed because it needs to sit for 40 days. So we think that is around about the 14th of November. So round about the 14th, middle of November, I am hopeful and I anticipate issuing that backstopped opinion, which will in turn find its way into your accounts. And that will then close, that opinion will be opinion and certificate, closing the audit for 22-23, which then gives you a clear run at 23-24. When I say clear, there will be ramifications that no doubt Nathan will want to articulate in terms of opinions going forward, given our disclaimer.
Thanks, Peter. Is there anything you want to say on that situation? It's obviously not a fantastic situation for us to find ourselves in, but it feels to me that there's not a lot we can do now to mitigate it. And, at least we got to a situation now where we know what will happen when, and, hopefully we can get to a position where we signed off 22-3 and 23-4, in reasonable time in due course. So that being the case, I would very much like to thank you for all the work you've done with us at Cheltenham Borough. I hope it's been a good time for you. I know lots of productive things have happened through that period, and I'd just like to thank you very much for your role here. And I know you're going to stay for item 6, yeah?
I am, Chair, and just to sort of reciprocate the thanks, it's been a really constructive relationship. I think we've had that professional relationship where we've had that challenge, but we've also had that connection as well. And I'm hoping that all the best for the future in terms of the accounts and the council generally. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to think we're in a strong position as you leave and that we'll continue on that footing. So many thanks for your help in all of that. But before I go off item 5, I will invite my colleagues to, if they've got any points or questions they want to raise. Otherwise, do we need to vote on this? 5C, a minute. No. So there no vote is required on this. So we will now move on to the short report, only 140 pages long, on our final accounts and the letter of representation, which, as Peter mentioned, is basically the first thing to sign off. And I'll ask Gemma to speak to that in a minute, but I will just make one comment that, whilst I have had a look at the 140 pages, I may not have studied each in incredible detail, but I am very reassured when I look at, where is it, our balance sheet. On page 81, it is very nice to see down the bottom line there that we now have £400 million worth of reserves. So, whatever problems we may get into in year, that is a nice position to be in, I feel. But maybe Gemma can comment on that and take us through the report.
Thanks, Chair. I think that's actually assets rather than reserves.
Yeah, that's what I said. Sorry.
Yeah, not quite as liquid.
No. Yeah.
So thanks, Chair. So I won't repeat the detail of the discussions on the disclaimer opinion and what that means. But what we've got here today is the 22-23 statement of accounts. So that's the single entity and the group accounts, which were originally published in line with the statutory deadline of the 31st of May 2023. So in line with what Pete's outlined, subject to that statement of account being approved by the committee today, we'll go ahead with the disclaimer opinion and close down the final statement of accounts in line with the backstop for 23-24, where we can then move on to the audit for the 23-24 accounts, which again have been published in May this year. Happy to take any questions, but I'd just like to put on record a big thank you to all of the finance team who've worked really hard on this. We have very complex accounts for district council. We've got, as the chair mentioned, a significant number of assets and valuations which are processed every year. We also have quite complex group accounts and the HRA accounts. So a huge thank you. Now one team, but at the time, both Cheltenham Borough Council and Cheltenham Borough Homes finance teams.
Thanks, Gemma. And yes, I didn't actually think you had £400 million in your back pocket, really. So I just used the wrong term. Apologies. I ought to know better at my age, having dealt with accounts for a long time. Presumably, from 2025 onwards, we won't actually need group accounts, will we? Will we have to move away from that? It's okay. Yes. Oh, yeah. That was my thoughts were that without Cheltenham Borough Homes in the airport, it might simplify matters, but of course that does depend on proceeding with the sale. And I am jumping ahead 2 years as well, so I'll stop my look into the future and look more sensibly at 22-23 and welcome any questions from the floor. Take Councillor Day first and then Councillor Winningham.
So what I'm about to say is sort of predicated on the assumption that we'll be asked as a committee to approve the accounts and the rep letter. So I think it's important to point out that not just myself, but I think if my maths is right, 4 of the committee members were only elected in May this year. So we're not even councillors for the period that the accounts are covering. And, all we have had is the pack, which we've had for maybe a week at most. And I suppose, given our incredibly limited involvement, I think it's just important before we approve it, if I can ask Gemma, if you stand by the accounts and the rep letter as we've received it and we're discussing tonight.
Well, perhaps I can just say first, I quite understand the position of the 4 of you. And it's probably less than a week that you actually had to read, so I sympathise greatly. But for this committee, I mean, firstly, Gemma closed these accounts in May of the previous year, so the finance team had made those then available to this committee effectively from that period. Plus, we have actually seen, I think, almost all of this again, except before you were elected. So, but from the committee's point of view, we probably have had a decent run. From my perspective, anyway, we've had a decent run. But I'll let Gemma elaborate.
Thanks, Councillor Day. So as I've said, so these accounts were published in line with the deadline, the statutory deadline of the 31st of May 2023. So they've been in the public domain since that point. They were also, as Pete mentioned earlier, they were available then for inspection by the public as well, in line with the statutory requirements. There have been a number of revisions to the original numbers where new information has come out. So, for example, in the group accounts, so Gloucestershire Airport have had their accounts audited, Cheltenham Borough Homes have had their accounts audited. Those numbers have then been reflected in the group accounts. So at various points through the period since they were originally published, they have been revised as numbers have been updated. So yes, in answer to your question.
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, I appreciate the situation you face, and obviously if you're feeling you abstain, I'll quite understand, but I will be voting in the yes column. Just two very quick points from me. Oh, sorry, Councillor Winningham. I beg your pardon.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to check one of the figures and just try and draw it out to highlight something for members of the public. So on page 42 of the document, which is page 108 of the agenda bundle, at the bottom, we've got the section on taxation and non-specific grant income. Can I just check that in terms of the difference between the 21-22, which seems to be £7.8 million of grant income from central government, and then the 22-23, which seems to be just £4.4 million of grant income, that is the level of cuts that the council has suffered in its grant income from central government in that period. Because I think it's worth drawing that out for members of the public who think, why are we having to pay so much more in council tax when our grant income as a council seems to be almost being halved on that period? And I just want to draw that out and make sure that that's a reasonably correct understanding.
That's an extremely good point. And if you look back a few financial years before then, I think you'll see a similar picture. And I suspect if you look at 23-4, the next financial year, I expect it'll be the same, but Gemma will confirm.
Thanks, Councillor Willing. So the number in 21-22, so that's 7.8 million. So at that period, you'll remember we were still receiving COVID funding for our response to COVID-19. That included direct grant income, but it also included grant income for compensation for lost income in various different income streams that our budget does rely on. So in terms of a like-for-like comparison, the 21-22 figures do include pandemic response funds, which were not available in 22-23.
Well, that's very. I can understand that point. Nevertheless, it is the case that if you look back, say, a decade ago, you would find that the central government grant to this authority was substantially more than it is now. And over that decade, we have had to react to that ever dwindling source of, as have most, probably every local authority. So thanks for that question. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, Councillor Winningham.
I just want to check. So on the county council, we've got a statutory override for something called the dedicated schools grant for our audited accounts, which basically says, yeah, you've got this huge amount of debt that will potentially bankrupt the council if it's ever has to appear on the accounts. And it's a fudge by the government. Can I just check that there aren't any statutory overrides on any of our thing, our accounting, and on our accounts. I'm not aware of any at district level. I am at county, but I just wanted to check.
No.
Right, thanks. That's an interesting point. I didn't know that actually about the county situation. There you go. So, just before I ask for a vote on the accounts and for you to give me approval to sign the letter, the annual governance statement, is it an appendix to the account? How does what exactly is it in relation to the account? Is it part? Is it technically part? It's actually part of. Okay, right. Okay, right. It says
It'll be published together.
it's published together. Excellent. Okay, great. Okay, I think that was everything that I had. Right. Are we voting electronically? Probably not, I guess. Or are we?
You can.
Yep. Okay. Let's vote. All those in favour of signing off the 22-23 accounts and me signing, i.e. the chair of the committee, signing off the letter of representation. If you could press the button accordingly.
There you go.
Well, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks again to Peter and to Gemma. Right. Moving swiftly on to item number 7. And this is well, we've already introduced Bishop's family have become our auditors. Well, pretty much of the day, I guess. Anyway, got a clear run now. I know it's a fairly general report, but please do feel free to add anything you'd like to it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, this is our external audit plan for 23-24. So we've wrapped up 22-23 and swiftly on with 23-24. I will pick up some of the points we've just mentioned about backstop and what that means for this audit. And there is some level of uncertainty around that still at the moment as we go through. Just in terms of section 1, it's just a reminder of the scope of the audit to give a true and fair view of the financial statements and make sure they're compliant with the code of practice. And as we've talked about, the accounts there, it's a group set of accounts because we've got the subsidiary of Cheltenham Borough Homes and also the joint venture Gloucester Airport Limited. Bishop Fleming and myself actually have been the auditors of Cheltenham Borough Homes for a number of years, so that makes the process in terms of consolidation, getting the information and relying on that information fairly straightforward for us. We will therefore be issuing group instructions to Hazelwoods as the auditors of the airport, so that we can rely upon their work and their audit on that side of things. The balances that come into the financial statements in terms of the airport aren't material probably at the income and expenditure level because we take their share of the profit figure, which won't be a material number, but actually in terms of the balance sheet numbers that come in, they are very material to the accounts, so we will do need to do some work to rely upon that. And that's a fairly well-trodden path. The current auditors will be doing that already, and I know from experience they've done that with us before. So they've issued us group instructions when I've worked as doing Cheltenham Borough Homes audit in the past. The other element of our work, as we've talked about before, is the value for money work. That's not changed in terms of year-on-year process. We'll be given assurances over the 3 areas of financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. So that'll bring in any recommendations that we just said that Grant Thornton have raised this year in their process and put them into our risk assessment. We'll follow those up through the process this year. In terms of the impact of the backlog, it essentially means that your financial statements will include some elements of qualification in there, certainly for this year and potentially next year as well. The difficulty is when you've got a disclaimed set of accounts is that actually we have no assurance over the opening balance position. So that provides 2 challenges, both with the sort of income and expenditure position. So do we know that any income and expenditure you're recognising this year actually relates to this year, or should it relate to previous years? Or is there some stuff in the previous year that should actually spill into our year we're looking at as well? Because that closure point hasn't been really nailed down by the auditors. And then the other element is actually a lot of the balance sheet audit relies upon the previous year's balance sheet being audited. So, for example, with your fixed asset valuation, the auditors will look at that and test additions and disposals, and we would normally take the brought forward position, test additions, disposals, look at any revaluations in the year, and rely on the opening position. So if there's no assurance on that opening position, we would need to do extra work on that kind of there to get that to a clean position. So what auditors like ourselves are doing that are picking up backstopped audits is actually developing a programme of work to make sure we can get to a point where in the future we can give clean opinions again. The challenge around that this year is if you look on our section 1.2 of our report there, you'll see the timetables that we're working to. So the backstop date for the 22-23 accounts, which Peter's talked about earlier, was that they'll be signed off by 13th of December this year. For the 23-24 then, we don't have much more time, so we have to sign off by the end of February. So by that time, our anticipated position will be that we've done the work, we'll do the work over the 24 year-end balance sheet, and we'll have started doing some work over the 22-23 work that Peter and Grant Thornton were able to pick up. But we won't be at a position where we're giving clean opinions. It'll be a disclaimer opinion, but we'll be still working through making sure we get comfortable with that balance sheet and provisions position. And the view is then that we want to get to a point where March 25, we're potentially giving clean opinions or really limiting those disclaimers. And then March 26 onwards, definitely clean from there on. So it comes with the challenge, this disclaimer position. I think the only other points probably I wanted to raise in there, there's the risk assessment. And this is our initial assessment of the risk. So this is from the back of discussions with management, review of the accounts, understanding of the sector, and needs to be pretty consistent with what Grant Thornton has raised as risk areas in the past. So there's some that are in there that are required under auditing standards. So management override of control, that's required by auditing standards to be a significant risk area for all audits. So it's about looking at estimates and judgments in the financial statements, and things like journals where you can potentially bypass controls, put the numbers straight into the finance system. And we use data analytics tools to do testing around journals. And then there's two about risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition, again, which is auditing standards require us to consider whether they should be significant risk areas. But we've considered those and at the moment proposed to rebut those significant risks because of the complexity, well, the straightforwardness and the nature of the income and expenditure streams, and actually the control environment that we have seen so far in the process, and the tone and attitude to fraud risk in the organisation. And again, that's consistent with how Grant Thornton and actually the majority of the sector deal with these risk areas. Then there's three risks around valuations, around land and buildings, investment properties and heritage assets on the balance sheet. These are risks for us because essentially they're large numbers and they're due to their estimates that are pulled together by management's experts to get to a valuation each year. So we'll do work around around the assumptions the experts have used, have a look at the inputs to the evaluations that have been used to make sure they look accurate and make sure they've been accounted for correctly. And similarly to that is the pension fund liability. So it's again looking at the work the actuary does and looking at the assumptions they've used. And then I guess on top of that, because we take a share of the county council's pension scheme, we have to get assurance from the county council scheme pension auditors to say they're comfortable with the overall asset value in the scheme. Therefore, we can place reliance on the share of the assets being allocated to us as well. That's a normal part of the process. So there's a change in auditors. There's, I think, KPMG are the Gloucestershire Pension Scheme auditors, and we'll be writing to those to confirm, get the confirmations for them for the March 24 position. Then probably just to highlight a couple of things more. The timetable is kind of protracted this year in terms of, also contracted because we're starting at this point much later than we'd want to. So when we've entered into the market as new entrants this year, I should have started with that because I'm not sure actually how much of you know much about Bishop Fleming. So Bishop Fleming we specialise in external audit across the range of public sectors. So we work with more academy trusts than any other firm in the country. We work with a large number of housing associations, colleges, and health authorities. And we thought that coming into the local government market was a nice next step for us and felt that we could make a difference in terms of the turnaround time and the challenges and the capacity in the sector. So one of the key targets for us is actually just getting local audit back on track and improving the reputation of audit in the local government sector. So the ambition for us with you is to bring things back on track this year. So it'd be a challenge for both us and finance, I think, because it's actually, we're going to be looking at, you've just finished one process. We're now going to be coming in, trying to do a fairly intense audit in late autumn over the winter to sign off. Then you'll be producing accounts again for March 25, and then we'll be looking to do those audits over the summer next year to get things back on track again. So that'd be a bit of a period of, and also, of course, there's additional work in there which talks about then to make up for the fact that backstop position for last year's accounts as well. So quite an intense period, but we're pretty keen to make sure that things, and we know management are from the discussions to date, to get things back on track as soon as possible. Part of the process, we'll be reviewing the audit files of Grant Thornton, so the work they have done on the 22-23 accounts are in terms of the sort of planning work, and we'll go back a year before that then to look at their more detailed testing work, so we can get assurances over processes, systems, any opening balances from 2 years ago that'd be useful to us as well. And they've been supportive in terms of that and the clients that we've taken on from them so far. And then finally, just to highlight, as we were on the topic of fees earlier, the scale fees, which obviously are set by the PSAA through the tender process. So how this works, for those that are new to the committee, through the tender process, we commit to PSAA a percentage of a fee that we'd be willing to do the work for. They consolidate this all across the sector and then develop the scale rate fee, which they set. So we're effectively almost like subcontractors to PSAA in this respect of doing the work. And so then that comes out with the scale rate fee, which is broadly based upon size of organisation, risk, etc. So that's your scale rate fee and the audit fees that's been set by PSAA. It flags in there that ISA 315 to be confirmed fee variation. This is an accounting standard, auditing standard that came in last year. Obviously, Grant Thornton haven't applied that last year because they haven't actually done the audit for last year in respect of this area. So those fees where it says TBC has now been set by the PSAA for next year onwards into a document that's been released, which is sort of about 9,000 something for that ISA 315 extra work. Our proposed fee for it for the first year, because there's a first year implementation cost, is actually 11,995. But I just thought I'd raise that now because that's actually not been put into the document at that stage because that's hot off the press. So that one's now confirmed. It's effectively £12,000. And as you say, additional work on the 2023 records is kind of watch this space at this stage because it's very much about confirming on a case-by-case basis what work we need to do to get to the right position, and depends what the materiality of certain balances, certain reserves in your financial statements, and how we can get to that assurance as quickly as possible. So we'll work with management to develop that plan. There's also work going on sector-wide to try and develop an approach for this. Our teams are actively involved in that because we are one of the ones that really want to clear this backlog position. But actually, as I say, it's still work in progress, and there will be some elements of judgment, and it will be slightly different for each individual organisation. So it's very much one that we have to keep reporting back to and keep communicating on, I think. So I think probably at that stage, probably have to take any questions about us, approach, fees, anything you like.
Thanks, Nathan. And it really it is complex times. The backstop is a fantastic opportunity, as I see it, to get back on track, but it inevitably carries some risk with it. You're trying to shoehorn a process that, until recently, has been taking considerably longer than it should, and you're having to contract the process at the same time as deal with a disclaimed set of accounts. Which I suppose in a sense it depends how you view that disclaimer. If the implication is that you'll do you'll carry out a fuller audit of 2-3, then that's just simply not practical. So I hope there's going to be some, if you like, leeway in how a sign-off of that year is viewed, and if something subsequently comes to light, it's not splashed all over the press as some sort of audit or local government accounting failure. Perhaps that's a vain hope. I don't know. It probably is, thinking about it. Anyway, I will take questions from the floor. The first one from Councillor Winningham.
Can you? Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about some of the valuation, the audit the proposals for the valuations, which are on page 204 and 205 of our document bundle, and also the pension liability, just to sort of try and get some more understanding of how that will happen, mainly because of the risk with regard, things like investment properties have been matters that have been improperly reported on other councils and then have taken them to Section 114 territory. And I think pension liabilities may have also been that sort of those sorts of issues. Can you go into a bit more detail of how you're looking at it? Because these assets are just notoriously difficult to value, because you're trying to work out how much a property is worth. Potentially, are you looking at the council being overly? Are you trying to catch us out for, not catch us out, but catch over optimism and over pessimism, or are you focused more on one or t'other? And again, the same with actuarial reviews, because you're trying to guess how long someone who's joined the council at 20 years old now may live by the time they've done 40 years service in local government, retired, and then so it's a very difficult thing to do. How are you? Again, are we looking for over optimism, over pessimism? Just within the bounds of materiality. I'm just after some more details, really.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's essentially we're looking for straight down the middle in terms of being materially correct. We're not looking for over or under optimism with these. We're looking for first of all, I guess that it's not us pulling the valuation together. So management will use their experts to do that, and it'll be different for each of the type of assets. So there'll be typically for land and buildings as a rolling programme. But one of the ways that we can probably get out of the backstop position more quickly is perhaps to value more of them at this next year end coming up, so we can have assurances over actually a hard position. There's different valuation techniques and methods and valuations. So things like investment properties market value is most appropriate, but some of the others it's more about these are specialist assets, what's the market, what's the valuation, and what's the most appropriate method. So we look at what the valuers use in terms of their approach. We use our own internal guidance, specialist guidance that's produced for us as auditors in the sector, and assess whether that's sort of been materially accurate. We also have a consideration of things like what hasn't been valued as well is one of the big issues. So when you've got a rolling cycle, if you've got something significant that's changed it in the wider environment, not so much at the moment because inflation is back down under control. But if in previous years we've had significant changes in things like heating costs, for example, that has an impact on the valuation of things like leisure centres. So we've seen in recent years. So we have a look at those kind of things. Pensions, you're absolutely right. There's a bucket load of assumptions in there in terms of both the future liability and then bringing it back to present value, and also things like how much of an asset you'd want to recognise if you get to a net asset position as well. I think what I'd probably say is most of those things are really important for the financial statements, but actually when you can strip a lot of these out to get to what's the underlying financial health of the organisation. The year-end pension accounting is probably not one of the key measures, and is often pulled out as part of management information you'll be receiving on a regular basis. Won't focus on these areas for the reason that actually doesn't feature into your sort of usable reserves. So I think that's it's really important for making sure that you get the snapshot right on your balance sheet and it gives you that accurate position. But I think the reporting you get from Gem and the finance team will probably exclude most of those kind of areas.
Thanks, Nathan. Just to reassure David, Nathan is clearly an optimistic guy because he talked about profit in the context of the airport. Sorry, that's being slightly facetious. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, my maybe hearing was correct. But in terms of what you anticipate having, I totally understand why 23, 24, I am anticipating they'll be disclaimed for the reasons you outline. I suppose I was hoping that 24, 25, they would be, fingers crossed, clean audit opinion. But I think what you were saying there was you had a question mark over that. And I just wonder if you could just explain a little bit more why, because I was thinking, if you can be happy with the closing balance sheet in 23, 24, we're kind of on track for subsequent years.
Yeah. As a firm, we actually are hopeful we can get to that position. There's a lot of discussion in the technical groups across the sector around uncertainty, particularly around reserves. If you're not getting a sign-off on the reserves, and it's not as straightforward as a corporate set of accounts, we've got one reserve, a profit and loss reserve. You've got a large number of different reserves, so it's how much more work you'd have to do on those in particular. And similar to what I was saying, I guess, on the fixed assets position, if we can get assurances over that portfolio position. But the reserves one is the one that's causing challenge amongst the technical teams at the moment. We think probably that, with some work you can get there. And it's just about a balance, I guess, when we get to it for that period next year. It's how much we will want to agree that we want to do that little bit of extra work to get us that clean opinion a year earlier.
I think it would be a fantastic achievement if you do that, but I will keep my fingers firmly crossed. Councillor Alden.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to double check my understanding really on a couple of terms. First one being the backstop. It's spoken about quite a lot in this meeting. I just want to make sure I've fully understanding exactly what that is. And also in the report mentioned there a backlog. So I just want to double check with regard to, does that mean we've got a number of accounts that haven't been audited? What exactly is the backlog?
Yeah, so the backlog is a technique.
Sorry, do you want me to comment on that? So absolutely. The backstop position is the backstop arrangement is actually an attempt to clear the audit backlog. So your backlog is essentially 1 year here that the 22, 23 accounts weren't signed off within the financial year following that. Across the wider sector, there's a more significant issue where some organisations and councils have got audits that have got multiple years of accounts that haven't been signed off. So this approach has been put into place to say, let's have a reset phase as the first phase of it, to say, let's draw a line in the sand here. We'll put these disclaimers in the accounts of anything that's not finished from 2023 or earlier. If that's not signed off by December 24, we'll put this disclaimer opinion in place. So that's what Grant Thornton are doing for your 23 accounts, but it's also happening for large ranges of accounts for sort of 21, 22 backwards with some organisations as well. So you've only got 1 year at least, so it does make it easier for us to then have that look at how we can get back and get that assurance in place. But that's what the backstop arrangement is about. It's just putting that reset phase, as they called it, into place. And then there's a number of dates then going forward that's in our report. So they're going to try and slowly move that backstop date forward each year. So essentially the 23-24 deadline is the end of February. So that's sort of 11 months after the year end, which is obviously a lot better than the 18-20 months at the moment. And then that'll come forward eventually to be November each year. So to the same calendar year, which is great. So it'll only be sort of which is broadly where things used to be, albeit that we did get to the September at one point of signing off. So it'll slowly move things back forward onto a sensible time frame. So that's what this is all about. It's about clearing that backlog in local audit, getting because resource has just been tied up on looking at things that are just too old now. And there's no value in anyone looking at this kind of things and providing assurance over things in 2020 or 2021. So let's draw a line, focus on giving some assurance over the current position. There is this technical hurdle to get over those that are got this backstop, but then hopefully we'll get to a better position going forward.
Yeah, so it was a public sector problem, certainly not one that was occasioned by late accounts, as far as I'm aware, our accounts have always been available by the required date, which is the end of May, after the end of the financial year. But obviously at that stage, they have not been externally audited. But we signed off 21, 22 at this equivalent meeting last year. And obviously we're hoping to sign off 22, 23 this time, but as for all the reasons we've talked about here. But for me, I was delighted when I learnt that finally something was being done at a national level to try and address this unsustainable backlog in external audit of public sector accounts. Just in terms of the backlog impact on us, I don't know if the chairman wants to say anything.
I think in terms of the impact on us, obviously it's added more work through the year, where we've had to constantly, update figures. So this time last year when we had the 21-22 accounts signed off, we then had to then go back into the 22-23 accounts and refresh those balances again. So I think great that we've now got Bishop's Fleming appointed, and we have a plan to how we can move this forward, so we're only balancing 1 year at a time.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, thanks very much, Nathan. Then feel free to go or listen to our ramblings for the rest of the meeting. No vote on that item required. Just to note that we've considered that plan and are comfortable with it. And so move us on to one of our regular items, the internal audit report. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm conscious that many members won't know me now because I wasn't at the last meeting. I was double booked. I had to go to Audit Committee at the Forest. So I'm Lucy Cater, Head of Internal Audit. I'm employed by SWAP Internal Audit Services, but I've worked for the councils for many, many years now. I'll be closing the door as I leave and turning the lights out. So the last meeting you met my colleague Jana, who's our principal auditor, and she brought to you the annual opinion for the year of 23-24. So the report you have tonight is our progress report for 24-25. It gives you an update of the work that the internal audit team are undertaking currently for Cheltenham Borough Council. So in the report tonight, you have 4 final audits, of which I'm hoping you've probably read through and you may have some questions. When we undertake an audit, we agree actions with the client and we follow those up, and that's in the second part of the report you've got tonight. I'll take questions on those in a minute, but there are a couple of things I wanted to add, Chair. We started an effectiveness review of the audit committee a little while ago, but I now appreciate we've now got new members. Shall we run it again, or would you like to wait a bit longer?
No, I think we're probably a little remiss in not having it sorted it by this time. So I'll be happy to liaise with any new members to talk through those issues. So if Claire and yourself are happy, I would be keen for us to press on.
Okay, I'll reissue the survey tomorrow then, Chair.
Please do. Yeah.
And I appreciate members probably all received a raft of emails on Friday about a stakeholder review from our system called Audit Board. I didn't know it was coming out like that. And it wasn't until I messaged our exec director and said, what's in this email and do our members know what they're doing and why? Which is why you've had a number of emails, but it's to get your opinion on the internal audit service that's being provided to you as members and as a committee. So if you would care to respond to it, it'd be much appreciated. But now happy to take any questions on my report.
Yeah, well, I've logged in. It's a good start. But it seemed that I was being asked to do a survey before I'd even joined. Anyway, that was a mistake as it turned out, I understand. So, yeah, if this is the normal format report, and questions really from us, I think, are about the specific audits that have taken place, the 3 that are referred to here. And I know Councillor Willingham will have some comments on at least one of them. But if we can look through those in turn, and also there's the follow-up of actions at the end, which I think we do need to have a look at as well. So if we could first look at the first one on page 226. Which on face of it looks pretty good. 1 priority 2 action, but for me that's an audit giving us substantial assurance with 1 action that will be addressed in time. So hopefully you're happy with that. But I suspect the next one on 227 is where Councillor Willing would like to come in.
Thanks, Chair. So I have some concerns that there are still some outstanding things related to this that either haven't been picked up or haven't been resolved by the council. The constituents who left the March meeting left under the impression that the application they objected to had been refused, and as was noted, they weren't told that there was no proper communication, which really undermines public confidence in this. There's also the issue with the council's compliance with Joint Core Strategy SD12. Now, this application was submitted to Cheltenham Borough Council in 2023, based on the date. It's 23-00625. The Joint Core Strategy was adopted on the 11th of December 2017, which means for almost 6 years, we have not been compliant with our own planning policy. I do not know how that happened, but our planning policy said from the 11th of December 17 that viability assessments should be published. So we spent 6 years not publishing something, not complying with our own planning policy, which is a pretty bad state of affairs to have been found out. There are some other issues that don't seem to have been picked up or resolved. So as at, yep, can I just come up with the other 2 bits as well? So as at 5:30 this evening, this planning application is shown on our website as not yet decided, and no decision notice has been published. So the residents in the block have got no decision notice from this council for that meeting. There's no published decision notice, and until that notice is published, they can't take this council to judicial review for A, not following its own policy, and B, for the total failure demonstrated by the text to comply with the Equalities Act. The council has a public sector equality duty, and this was raised in that meeting by members, by objectors. No member of the committee came back to discuss the fact that people who are older, protected characteristic of age, people who are disabled, protected characteristic of disability, would be looking at something where the exterior was ugly. It was described by a former councillor as a prison block in appearance. And to cap that off, we know the public sector equality duty was not done by the officers or by the committee, because the public sector equality duty statement on the planning report reads, as set out in the Equalities Act 2010, and it contains the same spelling mistake, because it is the Equality Act 2010, as every other planning report where they haven't done the public sector equality duty. So I'm really concerned that we seem to have missed public sector equality duty and the publication of a decision notice, and the fact that we've spent 6 years without publishing viability reports, and it's come to light in this application. And it's not really a criticism of the internal audit. Please don't take it that way. It's just something that my constituents are rightly really, really grumpy about, because effectively they're going to get something described by a councillor as looking like a prison block, potentially built opposite them, and they still have no way of challenging it through judicial review, because no decision notice has come out.
Thanks, David. I'll just make a few comments. Do you want to, I think Claire probably wants to come in. We haven't got planning officers here, so there's a number of things we can't really address, but this is an opportunity through the internal audit process to look to see if we've got actions in place that address those concerns that you raised, many of which I share. I was at that meeting. We apparently voted to reject by 5 to 4. I was one of the 4, I think. Anyway, the point was at that meeting, that's how it looked, and I appreciate that subsequently, you know, on review, it looked as if we hadn't made a decision in full possession of the information, and I think that process does need to be analysed, and that's hopefully in this report. You know, we should end up with an action to ensure that process is better in the future. In terms of viability assessments, again, we've talked a lot about that in planning, and now we've got this opportunity in internal audit, and hopefully through the recommendation we come up with here and the actions that follow that recommendation, that internal audit conclusion, we reach a better place where we are actually fully compliant. And viability assessments are a real challenge, I think, in so many contexts in planning. And I suppose it's a slightly political statement, but I do feel that developers, they need to be held to account basically for those viability assessments, and it is difficult. I think it's a struggle for our planning team to do that, and hopefully we can get to a position where they are subject to more scrutiny and we get to a better position. On the equality duty, I can't really comment. I don't know. It's not something I'm terribly familiar with. So let me hand over to Claire first before
Thanks, Chair. The viability point is just looking at the sort of outstanding actions, I think is still, looks like it's still pending. So it looks like that work is still ongoing. But I will take away the question around the decision notice, because I don't know why that's not been published yet. There may be a perfectly legitimate reason, but I just don't know, so I can take that away. Just on the equality duty, obviously, without talking about the specifics of that case, because you know that there is a possibility that may become subject to a legal case. I think just to give members a bit of an update, some members here are on Overview and Scrutiny Committee. You know that we've been looking at our policy around ED&I. We've been out to consultation on that policy, and on the back of some of the learning that's happened recently, there is in the emerging policy a whole section around planning applications. There is also a whole section around licensing applications, and talks about the process and how we have due regard and that kind of thing. So we are definitely changing practice in that area. So I just wanted to give that little bit of kind of reassurance that work is kind of developing and ongoing, and hopefully you will start to see that change as we move forward.
I suppose the question for Lucy is, having heard what you've now heard, are you comfortable that the audit captured those points and that ongoing actions will ensure that we do better next time?
Sorry, Rhiannon. One of the agreed actions is that all viability assessments must be published. So we did take that into account as part of the audit.
In terms of the meeting conclusion, do you think we've got in place a set of actions now that would?
I could have added to that actually.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to step in where Lucy was going to speak, but the other thing that's happened since that March meeting is we've now developed a much more detailed kind of set of procedure notes, particularly for the chair, and a flow chart that the chair has available to them at every time to make sure that the process is strictly followed. So we hopefully won't end up in a situation again where it's unclear what the outcome of the meeting was and having to go back and things. So that has been done as well.
Yes, it was not our finest hour as a planning committee. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks. Can I suggest that we take, and I'm happy to do this as chair of licensing, but we need to take that learning of the flowcharts and the decision-making process for any regulatory things that we do, possibly for full council as well, just to make sure that whoever is chairing meetings that are making those decisions. I think there's one for motions which explains how to do an amendment, which I know causes chaos at council occasionally, but it would be useful for us to work through that, not just for planning, but also for licensing, given the diversity of cases. The other question I thought I probably just ask for a yes, no answer rather than any, is obviously the developer in this one complained about the first hearing. Have we had complaints about the second hearing from the objectors, the planning, and do we know whether they've been resolved or whether they've ended up at the ombudsman or what have you? My understanding was there was a complaint.
Happy to pick up separate conversation with you about licensing, not a problem. There was a complaint. It was responded to, and we haven't had anything further that I am aware of. So, or any communication from the ombudsman. So.
What do you want to add, Lucy? No, great. Okay. Anything else from the floor? Right. Can we move on then to duplicate payments? Well, there's nothing, no problem here, I'm pleased to say. Councillor Day.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a quick question on the duplicates, which were a small percentage. I'm not sure if it was 0.01% or if it should be 0.1%. I don't know. Just doing the maths in my head. I don't know how much we do spend a year.
I could look at it and I can let you know for definite, but
actually, I suppose the question is the £20,439 that was duplicate. I just wondered if that had already been resolved prior to you identifying it, you know, that any monies had been recovered prior to your audit.
from memory it has, yes, or it's definitely been corrected now. I can't remember what the reasoning was for it, but again, I can find it and pop it in a quick email tomorrow.
It's simply whether when you identified those duplicates, finance said, don't worry, we've already got the money back, or whether that process started, you know, you would identify those duplicates, if you see what I mean.
Thanks. Councillor Willingham.
I just wanted to ask about I was going to ask the same question that Councillor Day asked about whether we've got the money back, but I was going to ask, do we know what the cause was, whether it was error or was it fraud? And if it was fraud, has it been referred?
It's not fraud, it's error.
Right, I'm going to move us on then to the final specific report, and that's about the procurement and appointment of consultants. One priority 2 item there about ensuring that we've got an appropriate register and are looking at that when we're appointing consultants. Are you happy that there's now an action in train to ensure that process is appropriate for the future?
That's part of the second part of the report, so it will be included in your list of agreed actions.
Let's move on to the list of agreed actions. And I suppose, well, a couple of things really. there's a number that are where we've gone red on the timescale, and for instance, the item on access to information, where priority 2 item that where the deadline was 31st of July, and there is a comment from officers here which kind of suggests it's been addressed, but I'm presuming the fact that it's in here red means that there's something more that needs doing.
The reason I've coloured it red is to tie in with the graph beforehand, so you can see which ones are due this month, which ones are overdue by 30 days and 60 days.
Yeah.
So I've tried to be a bit clever.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I think when you've got a time scale at the end of July and you're meeting at the end of October, it's quite reasonable to flag it up in that way. Just that I'm just wondering where we are with it, really, I suppose.
Shall I try? Yeah. So this relates to largely to do with the system that it was in place for FOIs in particular, freedom of information requests, and we are in the process of building a system through our new, well, it's not so new now, but through our Netcall platform. Unfortunately, because of other things that have come online that have taken priority, for example, the new charge around waste containers and some work around sort of really improving our process around miscollections. It just means that the programme for the development of our Netcall has been pushed out slightly, which is why it's running behind schedule, because we've not got around to finally developing the product as it needs to work yet. And once that's in place, then data will all kind of automatically delete, which will satisfy the audit. So that's what the delay is.
Just to add to that, Chair, I've just checked it, we had an update from the interim head of customer services who said the build on the system started last month with an estimated completion date of January 25. So we've extended the timescale for it.
That answers that one. Thank you. Councillor Willingham first.
I was just ask after a couple of updates on the ones that are red on page 235. So we've got the transparency data for CBC transparency data, where it just says non-compliance with the code, which was due at the end of March. We've also got the procedures and policies for service charges for James Donovan Call, which I am sure is an issue that has been in the media, and I want to just check that that hasn't been misplaced in the onboarding of CBH, because obviously it doesn't look like it's been done, and I'm sure it is an issue that has vexed a good number of the people that live there. So just after an update on those two, if possible.
In answer to the first one, some actions have been complete, but housing services need to be added to the organisational structure. Pay grades need to be linked, and senior officer pay still needs to be published. So that's the transparency one. And the James Donovan Court one. What's that one? Thank you, Gemma.
So Councillor Willingham, on the James Donovan Court action that was underway, we have, since the audit was concluded, we have had a tribunal hearing, so we have some actions to complete as part of that. So it's bringing all of that together and doing it in one go.
Could I ask a potentially naive question about consultants, actually, to go back to that? When we say we're employing consultants on short-term contracts, I assume, is that people who add value with skills that we don't have in the organisation that we purposely want for a short period to advise on something? Or are they people that we employ in the short term because we can't recruit. For instance, in the short term, I know we had a conservation officer came in because we couldn't recruit. So that's question one. If it's the latter, that we're employing consultants because we can't recruit, and obviously consultants are probably by definition a lot more expensive than full-time staff, are we then looking at the employment of consultants and thinking about how we could recruit better or how we could grow our own, or should we be changing salaries? So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, out of this workflow where you're analysing consultants, if they are, instead of full-time staff, is there a loop back to recruitment and staff retention and all those things that should mean that we don't need consultants or need fewer consultants?
So at our next meeting, we'll see what the actions are and how the officers have responded to them. And you're really saying you'd hope to see something to that effect in that.
Assuming it's the case that it is sometimes just short-term staff, rather than people you've said, well, we've got a problem, we don't want to recruit someone permanently, we just want them to write a report on it. That's fine, that's one thing. But it's another thing when it's...
So I'm, I suppose, not officially an officer of the council, but Claire's looking at me over the screen, so she may want to...
I'll give it a go. So I think it's both. So there are some consultants that we engage to do very specific things. So I'll give you some examples. Obviously, we've had an interim director for housing transformation, very specific appointment. We've had a specialist in to do some work around property compliance, very specific appointment. But there are occasions when we have to have consultants because of a gap in the employment market, and we are unable to recruit. And the obvious examples usually of those at the moment are around the world of planning, which is a national recruitment issue across local government, as we know. But what I would say is absolutely where we do need to get consultants in to fill employment gaps, absolutely there is a lot of work going on in HR at the moment to look at how we do recruitment, how we attract people, how we retain people. So there is a...
We pay more so we don't have to employ consultants and things like that.
Potentially that's a whole pay and grading review, which we will be looking at in due course, yes, but that's a significant undertaking.
Okay, thanks. Just a final one from me on the S106 situation. We've got a number of recommendations where effectively we deferred conclusions from July, and we're now very close to the end of October. So I suppose the question is, is it all going to be resolved in the next 9 days, or do we need to give someone a nudge?
One of those agreed actions has already been closed. That's the one that's got 4159 at the beginning. And the others, I've got an update on those as well. So we've had an update provided. We've had an update attached, but we're waiting clarification in order to close. So they could be done within 10 days, Chair. They could.
The S106 situation is something that we do want to ensure there's a very good governance process in place for. I'll look with interest at the next report. Thanks. Anything else, Lucy? Oh, sorry. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, it's very similar to your question, actually, Chair, just regarding the timescales on there. I notice how several of them have been pushed back, and a number of them, the timescale end date is the end of this month, as you say, in 9 days or so. Are those timescales definitive timescales for completing those actions, or is that a timescale for review?
The timescale of 31st of October is the timescale that we've got at this point in time, but they're not when we agree an action, that's discussed with the client. So it's not something that audit say, you need to get this completed by this certain point in time, because we can't do that. So it's an agreed action at that point with an agreed time frame. And as we know, as Claire said, you know, there's issues with recruiting planners. 106 falls under the planning service. It all has a knock-on effect, and we just have to be pragmatic and extend some of these timelines.
Councillor Day.
It's probably just my understanding. When things are going overdue, I just wonder, are we the escalation process, you know, for pushing, or is there an escalation process internally amongst officers?
We have a process, so the team are proactive in all agreed actions. So the ones that are dated 31st of October, as the example, they have followed those up this month so that I could bring an update to this committee, because my report was written 4 weeks ago, which is why it looks a bit different now. If we do need to escalate because no one's doing anything, we can go through the monitoring officer, we can go to Paul Jones, we go to the governance group, or if it gets really bad and you're really not happy as a committee, then I think you have that opportunity to raise your concerns, and I think it's within your remit to call officers of the council in to explain why it's gone over.
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes. Down to us as well, as much as anybody else. Right. Anything else on this item, or can I get you to agree that you've considered and you're happy with it? We'll take the lack of dissent as affirmation. Right, moving then on to item number 9. Right, it's Emma's report. As you've heard, there are a number of new members, so I wonder if you'd mind just giving a brief introduction to what you do and how you do it, as it were.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm Emma Cathcart. I'm the Head of Service for the Counter Fraud Enforcement Unit, which is a council partnership for 6 councils to deliver counter fraud enforcement services. The host authority is Cotswold, so we are paid and employed by Cotswold, but for the purposes of all the other councils, we're seconded to you. So when we're doing work for Cheltenham, we're Cheltenham staff. Makes data protection and all the regulations around that much easier. So yeah, we're effectively staff. I've got some staff members who have never been to Cotswold because they are geographically based and live outside of that area, and we have offices in all the different council offices, so they just sit in those that need them and the delivery, etc. I deliver 2 reports to each council's audit committee every year. Because of the number of councils that I deliver services to do 4 would be excessive. I spend my life writing reports as it is, so to do any more would be painful, I think. But effectively the service is split in 2. So the counter fraud provision is a support service for everybody in the council, every service, every member of staff, etc. And we would look at any risks within our processes, within our activities, where we can add help. We look after policies, etc. But we also undertake a lot of enforcement, and that will be with any of your enforcement officers, so planning, housing, heritage, licensing, wherever there are people that need prosecuting, my team tend to work with the officers to do that. But we also undertake staff internal matters, so disciplinaries and code of conduct. We're asked to investigate the member code of conduct complaints as well. So it's quite a wide remit, and you get a snapshot of what we've been doing through the year. With your April report, you also get an update on our surveillance activities. So I look after all of the compliance to do with surveillance and how we acquire communications data when we're investigating people, and part of the remit is that you are updated annually, so you get that in your April report. So yeah, kind of a swinging by matter. We're just reviewing actually our overarching agreement, so Cheltenham will consider the extension of the collaboration agreement in December, I think. So yeah, the service has been going for 7 years, and the agreement's being renewed. Within the report, as I say, I provide an update on some of the projects that we're doing, some of the strategic work, and then an update regarding the reactive work we do, so the casework, etc. In terms of the focus for this year, that's about grant schemes, so assisting with that. We now administer many grants, and historically the council didn't do that, but there are lots of different grant schemes now. So we're doing some work around how we support officers to ensure assurance and verification checks, and that we're paying the right people, the right funding in the right way. The policy that starts that off is being considered by the council, and then behind that we'll do some procedural work, so support tools, what you should be asking people for, how we can help verify applications, etc. The other area is about polygamous working. So that's about people with more than one full-time job. That isn't about people who have a second job. That's perfectly fine, and they declare it. That is about people who haven't declared the fact that they've got second, third or fourth employment, and they're clearly not delivering the 37 hours that they're being paid for to the council. We have actually got a case in court at the moment for an ex-member of staff that wasn't Cheltenham, but that had several different jobs. In terms of 3.1 and 3.2, thankfully Tewkesbury's back online, so they should be sorting the build of the website for all the residents, visitors, staff, anybody to go to look at scam information and advice and how to report and how to get victim support, etc. So that's back on track, and we should be launching our website, which is the one relating to the partnership, sometime in the new year, and then the attached one to do with the Gloucestershire Math Group not long after that. So yeah, that's ongoing and back on track. In relation to the business grants at 3.3, we did a lot of work around the administration of those, but we are now, unbelievably, after 4 years, still dealing with them. And it's all about the debt recovery and liability. So we're looking after the transfer of liability and the collection of the money and transfer back to central government. They've assured us that the deadline's being extended. So if you had anybody on a payment plan that was returning funds, but it was a large debt, my concern was that if they were going to stop us being able to transfer liability, if somebody stopped paying that debt sometime next year, that we wouldn't have a mechanism for transferring it, but we will. They provided the assurance, so that's ongoing. In terms of Cheltenham, you had hardly any. It was very small value that was overpaid and that needed to be transferred, but for information, that's in there. 3.4 is about the National Fraud Initiative, which is all local authorities sending their data into central government. They mix it about and then they send us a load of anomalies to investigate. My team and look after the matches that go to revenues, benefits, housing. So that's all about, should you be having a single person discount? Are you the right resident? Are you subletting your property? Those sorts of things. So they review those, and then I provide you with an update on our activities each time I come back. So at the moment it's looking pretty good. We're on top of your most recent council tax related matches. They've been cleared. What needs to be cleared are the tenancy pilot ones, which was a bit of a push by NFI to see if they could do some more to tackle the issues around housing and tenancy fraud. So trying to get data from Airbnb, etc., to see if we can identify people subletting. We have just finished, don't know where I've written about it, 3.8. We've just finished the procurement review. So I've got the report to just have a look at before I send it to Gemma to consider. So that was a review of small supplier payments. So to ensure that we're not going around the rules in terms of procurement, that Gemma is aware of who we're paying, that it's not different pockets across different departments within the organisation, you know, that it's a holistic view of all small supplier payments, so she can have a look at that. And we've completed the small business rates relief review. So we did that across all of our councils. So we did internal matches to see if you had businesses with SBR, which shouldn't have, you can't have two businesses that have it, but we've also done it across the partnership. So if somebody had a business in Tewkesbury Borough, Cheltenham Borough and Cotswold District, we've provided a match so we can sort it out across the whole partnership. So yeah, that's also been completed. At 3.10, we look after your council tax reduction scheme. So that used to be council tax benefit. And we've done an awful lot in the last year or so about making that more efficient, not necessarily relying on the Department for Work and Pensions for joint working, decisions from them. So how can we look after the scheme you administer to make sure that you're maximising your council tax revenue and you're paying the right people the right amount of money? So that's ongoing. You'll get more detail now because of the changes with CBH on the work we do in relation to your housing stock. So previously I'd have done a report to the audit committee at Cheltenham Borough Homes and just provided a small summary to you, but I'll now provide much more detail in these reports about the work we do. But we do an awful lot of verification work. We updated and refreshed and made sure you've got a housing and tenancy fraud policy. And a lot of that work is very difficult to explain because it's about loss avoidance. It's not necessarily about revenue generation, but it's about looking after the properties, making sure you've got the right tenants in there. It means the housing waiting list isn't getting ever bigger and we're putting people in emergency housing and paying a lot of money for that, etc. But yeah, it's a large area of fraud. And then at 3.17, in terms of wider enforcement support, you might have seen in the press the case regarding the little store up in Charlton Kings. My team obviously worked with the environmental health team on getting that through court. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Emma. Yes, my brief experience of your team is that it more than covers itself financially. Let's put it that way. I was surprised. I think I've been surprised how much there is to investigate and how many ways there are to defraud the council effectively. Just for my interest, before I take the questions from my left, it talks about initial assessments for housing being effectively being. Is it that the initial assessments, whether it's gold band, silver band, bronze band, etc., is it that you found a number that were where the assessment itself had been wrong, or is it that circumstances change and therefore a change of band should have occurred, if you see what I mean?
It's a totally mixed bag of all of that. So it will be that some are false. So somebody said they were overcrowded when in fact they're not remotely overcrowded, or that they were homeless and they're not. They're not being evicted. They're perfectly fine. It will be error in that it's simply that it's been banded in the incorrect way, and it could be that somebody has already been housed and they just haven't been taken off the list. So it's a multitude of things, and as a consequence of us, it's because we can plan the review. We do this for all 6 councils. So again, it's about making sure Gloucestershire as a whole is robust so that they don't just move and try and apply down the road. Everybody's got the same process. So yeah, it's effectively because we've got an easier resource to just review very quickly than the teams internally. But the teams on top of this do their own verification. So if somebody was about to be housed off the list, they would then undergo a number of assurance checks again, and we would help with those. So it's just a big review of those 3 bands every couple of years to keep your list as small as possible, to ensure that people are housed, the right people are housed rather than the wrong people.
Yeah, thanks. Given the scarcity of social housing, it's I found the numbers slightly scary, but I'm relieved that we're going through the process. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. As ever, I like these reports, so I want to thank you and your team for the work you do, because it's important. And the housing fraud, not only is it depriving, if someone's on the wrong list or the wrong banding, is it depriving people who need housing? There's also the right to buy fraud, which is taking housing out of our stock and then giving someone a profit that they're not entitled to. So this is really important work. And also tackling things like the pollution control. Again, it's something that has a direct detrimental impact on people's lives. What I wanted to ask you, you've got the list of new data sets with things like the Airbnb. Are you on the lookout for other data sets? So, for example, I don't know, and also, do you provide feedback, for example, with the because the council's got a register of licensed HMOs, and I wondered whether that's checked to make sure you're looking to find places that should be HMOs where there's too many people, but also if that HMO is being misused in terms of, but it's, are you always on the lookout for other data sets and what have you?
So NFI will ask, because we're part of the pilot, we will feedback on results and how good this has been. And a lot of it at the moment has been financial credit checks, etc., of people in properties that aren't we don't think they're the tenants, but a lot of that again will be non-dependent children using their parents' properties, etc., etc. So it's not going to be riddled with fraud. I think the Airbnb data was not as good as they'd hoped it would be. It was difficult to get all of what they needed, so it was only a small proportion. But yes, we will feedback. Yes, we're always banging on at them. They do on and off. They do a review of, is this match worthwhile? Is it not? And we do feed in and say, this is a huge amount of resource for very, very little. In all honesty, the housing benefit ones fall under that category now, because we end up referring everything to the Department for Work and Pensions because we're not the body charged with investigating it. So why are we endlessly looking? I mean, it's about data. So yes, they are always looking to improve. I think the other pilot was around deceased people and our council tax records. So again, we'll feedback on that and whether it's been a useful exercise or whether it just duplicates tell us once, which should be working in itself. So we're always thinking about, what could we do? And hence the small business rates relief review. We did that ourselves. That isn't a NFI driven matter. But the Cabinet Office are pretty good at constantly reviewing NFI, yes. And it's a great tool. It's every authority. So, we want to make sure that we're all matching. I think they're probably going to expand on employment data. They have to, because there's a lot of cases now of people working for multiple councils and organisations.
So thank you for your report. I mean, really wide work and really important work, so thank you. Potentially naive question. When you say enforcement, is that planning enforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
It can be planning enforcement. It's reliant on the officers of the different departments referring it. So through to us, through our referral links, and then it upload a case and we'll work with them. But yes, any enforcement you can think of in the council. So trees, listed buildings, planning, housing, any enforcement. As you say, licensing, we were talking about earlier, whatever is referred, we'll look at.
The only reason I asked the question is I can't see anything about planning enforcement on there.
If they don't refer it, then we can't investigate it with them. So it's reliant on the teams moving matters through to my service for us to undertake. It means I'm not doing it, my team aren't doing it with them. Someone else may be, yes. That would hopefully come through planning reports and updates.
No, it wouldn't, because the planning committee, planning team aren't looking at those enforcements 3 years down the line, as I see it. And as councillors, we get a lot of feedback from often neighbours or similar who are concerned that those those conditions, for instance, aren't being complied with. And I think there is a problem in the sense that the planning team don't do anything unless they're triggered to. So it's a kind of vicious circle rather than a virtuous circle. Now, I don't know whether there's anything counter fraud. I'm not quite sure that that's your area, But it is, certainly for me, it is an issue for the council.
Can I just quickly build
Yeah.
on that point? I mean, I think there should be a mechanism to know whether planning enforcement is happening or not, be it by you or be it by anyone else. And I don't know what the mechanism is.
I think probably the best thing to do is if I take that offline and see what the reporting mechanism is, because as Emma said, the counter fraud team and enforcement unit will only pick up enforcement if it's referred through to them. So if it's referred through, you'll obviously get it in this report. I think what you're saying is, well, Emma's report hasn't got anything referred through, so there's nothing to report. So what is going on over here in planning? So needs to be some reporting somewhere. So I'll pick that up with planning and get an answer.
I was just going to say, to give you some assurance, we are about to run a whole load of enforcement training through November, and planning are engaged on that. So planning enforcement will come, and what we will do off the back of the training, because it's a refresher on criminal investigation activity, how we undertake surveillance, what we need to be doing with social media and open source intelligence. We'll also do a line on how to refer to us and remind them of activities, because again, we may have been here 7 years, but with staff changes, etc., I need to keep revisiting some of the teams to go, this is how we work, this is what we do, to remind people, because if you've had a change in staffing, you know, they may not have caught up.
Just say one thing, you know, I feel particularly strongly about this subject. It is important that when planning officers make decisions, or the planning committee make decisions, that those decisions are respected and followed through. So there needs to be some mechanism to know whether what is decided by the planning committee and the planning officers actually happens or not.
And I'm sure we could all come up with several examples of where that actually hasn't happened. But Claire, I think, has given us an undertaking that she'll have to, and we've also been aware of a lack of officer availability, if you like, you know, in the enforcement team. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. It was worth just saying that I think the licensing team have generally worked with one legal and done some of their enforcement internally. So, for example, if any drivers who are not licensed by Hackney Carriage drivers, what you'd call a taxi, not licensed by Cheltenham Borough Council, are caught plying for hire, often during March Race Week, then those PACE interviews and any subsequent prosecution or caution seem to have been dealt with by the licensing enforcement team in the Borough Council, and then one legal. And I think they do get reported back to the licensing committee, but at the moment, the amount of time things are taking to go through the magistrates' court means that there are issues with what's actually happening that are outside of everyone's control. There seem to be huge delays in prosecutions, which is denying people timely access to justice. But it's a reassurance that licensing does do that itself.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was a very good debate and a fair airing of, and a good airing for you, hopefully, Emma. Anything else on that? Or can we move on to item number 10, which is a review of the risk register, which Claire is going to introduce. Looks like there's a fair amount of no change, which is good in a way. But over to you, Emma.
Claire.
Go ahead.
It's been a long meeting.
That's all right. It's late. Yeah, so this is the current version of the strategic risk register. So just for the benefit of any new members that have not seen this before, this is what we call the sort of corporate or strategic risk register. There are obviously a number of operational risk registers that sit at service level that sit underneath this and feed into this. But this is the document that we look at leadership team, and obviously what comes through to you as a committee. You can see all of the current risks on the register. 2.7 of the recover report just highlights to you what the current top 6 risks are, so you can see those there. And the other thing probably to just draw out in this meeting is this is the first time you're seeing this with the new
housing corporate risks added. So you'll notice that there are some new ones that all, or 6 new ones actually, that all relate to the transfer of housing services. Since the last report, the 8 risks have been removed from the register. So that's set out in 2.10 of the report. You can see some detail there. They're largely around things around like the MX, for example, because that's now been completed, and risks around the CPH transfer, because obviously the transfer has now concluded, and a number around things like the Afghan resettlement, asylum seekers, etc. They do remain risks to the organisation, but but at an operational level as opposed to a strategic level. So I won't go through them all, but I'm happy to pick up any questions.
Thanks. Just from briefly from the chair before I take questions. We're pretty familiar with these, and the only thing that worries me slightly is that they tend to be no change, and it's slightly scary when you've got high risks that they don't change. And I don't know whether that's because how can I put it? It would be good to see to note when there was a new high risk emerging. That I think that feels like it's in a sense more important. Although these are high numbers, and we probably won't be able to change the numbers, they're perhaps not quite as scary as the numbers might suggest. That's my, having looked at this for a couple of years now. I in a sense, I don't like the fact that we haven't reduced them, but in the sense that they're almost irreducible. And it's really if there's something new emerges that we should be most concerned, I think. Right, hands, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a couple of questions. The first one was related to how frequently these are done, simply because, like you said, there's a lot of these items are listed with no change, and some of them may be sort of irreducible. But is the purpose of keeping those within this risk register just so that we're sort of maintaining our vigilance around those risks?
Yeah, go on. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so obviously each risk is set a review date, so it's really the last column and thing you'll see when they're reviewed. But yeah, they stay on there because they remain risks to the authority, so they may not have changed. So the one around sort of like financial strategy, for example, some of that is obviously outside of our control in terms of funding and things. So they may not change in terms of their scoring, but we keep them on there because they remain a risk to the organisation and to the council as a whole. So, but yeah, they're reviewed in accordance with the dates that are set in the column.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting philosophical point about how you manage risk, but I can't see an alternative to keeping those on as they are. So, but yes, we do need to be aware if something's worsening or it's emerging, and I'm sure that will be highlighted in this report if that were the case. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. Oh, let's move this back. So I've got a couple of questions. So the first one is, have we proactively reviewed the cybersecurity risk following the events at Tewkesbury Borough Council? And the second one is just expressing a bit of a concern about not just the Petersfield hub, but also community facilities in general, because I understand my county council role that there's some concerns about the one in St Mark's, which is on Brooklyn Road. And there's also, I believe, some other community centre lease issues elsewhere in the borough. And given that each of these things either should be or are or essential to the communities that they serve, I just wonder whether that risk, either I've missed it or it hasn't been, whether it should be captured, if that makes any sense, because it's about leasing, it's money, and it's how we support the most deprived communities and the people living there.
Yeah, thanks, David. Certainly the cyber one, I'm sure that Claire can respond on that. I think the one on communities, is a great concern, I think, to most of us. Well, I can speak for the Lib Dem side, but I'm sure it would equally apply to Greens, that we are very, very worried about those facilities, and have recently come across a number of examples where there is a problem. I don't think I've seen it reflected yet in risk terms, but perhaps that's something Claire could take away.
So on the two issues that Councillor Willingham you've raised, both of those sit at operational level. So as Claire said, these are strategic. The strategic risk register. There is a cabinet decision coming on the floor plan on the St Mark's. I think at the end in the 26th of November cabinet. On the wider community centres, there are a number of leases we have where we have various different arrangements. We have some that are holding over, some that are not, and some where we have gone through the third sector rent support process. So I'm happy to pick up offline any specific issues, but from a risk perspective, those would sit at operational level within the property team.
So on the cyber one, always find talking about cyber security really difficult in public meetings. But in essence, yes, it has been reviewed in light of the incident, and the assurance that we have been given is that our systems are as well protected as they've ever been, and that we're quite confident that what happened at Tewkesbury, without disclosing any details, wouldn't happen within our system.
Thanks, Claire and Gemma. Just on going back briefly to the community facilities, community hub issue, I suppose I can see how it's operational in the sense if you're looking at one place, that's clearly an operational matter, and if you do it place by place, I think it's a question really. Are we approaching something that would effectively be a strategic problem, in that a number of such facilities around the borough are facing potential closure, and that may not be the case, but I wondered if if it were, would you regard that then as something more strategic?
So I think if I was to consider the strategic impact of that, I think that would sit as part of risk 403. So the prioritisation of capital resources. So we have a number of projects, we have a number of buildings, whether they are operational or more strategic buildings. We have a finite pot of resources of which to invest in across the town. So I think I would from an officer perspective, I would consider that as part of risk 403.
Good answer. Thanks for that. Councillor Took.
Sorry, just checking I understand it. If a dot is on the far right, is it effectively saying if we do not do the actions, this will happen? The probability is 100%?
But it's difficult because nothing's ever 100%, but it's the maximum probability that we can foresee. So yes, it's highly likely that it will happen if we don't put appropriate mitigations in place.
Not actually any examples of that, are there?
Or
are there?
There is one with a probability of 5 that I can see just on one screen here. So yeah, which is 247. So that's around the Swindon Road depot. So we know that if we don't do something, well, we know that risk is likely to materialise if we don't
do something.
Same with the stock condition data. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Things will effectively fall into that category, right? And
Yeah, so stock condition is another one, because we know that risk will be realised if we don't have stock condition data, and we know we won't be compliant with the legislation, and therefore we will not pass our regulatory process. So we know that that risk will materialise, which is why the probability is so high.
any other questions at this stage on the risk register? No, excellent. So we move on to the last report. Again, Claire, and it's about the risk management policy. Fire away, Claire.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Members will be, some of you will be sort of familiar with seeing this this document. It's been, you know, the original version of it has been in existence for some time. Obviously, as we came together as two organisations, CBH had a different kind of risk strategy and policy to what we have. So we've brought it all together to combine it into one. We have retained what was the council's matrix, the 5x5 matrix that we were just talking about. So the probability of 5, impact 5 as our preferred method. And the policy has just been updated, as I said, to reflect the coming together of two organisations. Thank you to those members, by the way, that took the time to read the draft and to feed in to the policy as it developed. I know we had some good input, particularly from Councillor Day. So hopefully we've covered off the points that you raised. But yeah, so as I said, it's just a refresh of the policy to capture the fact that we're now one new organisation, and to confirm that we are going to continue with the sort of 5x5 matrix. But if anyone's got any specific questions, otherwise we are looking for a vote on this one, Chair, to approve the policy.
Script, but nevertheless, happy to take it. Councillor Day, your name's been mentioned. Would you like to?
Thank you. Really.
Thank you, exactly.
No, thank you for your thank you, Claire. So just for the committee's benefit, and I'm very pleased, you know, that, to be honest, really the two suggestions I made have been fully incorporated, was when I read the original policy, or the draft policy, my concern was that it was great in what was there, but it was really just looking at risks, I felt, on an individual basis. And then that was like the end of the process. And my concern is that I felt there needed to be another stage 2, if you like, where you said, okay, these are all the individual risks, but then you just look across them and really look for common dependencies in triggers that could crystallise that risk. Because what I was feeling is you might go through that individual process and you might have a number of, let's say, medium kind of risks. And so you're not really too concerned about mitigation because they're medium. But if they're subject to the same trigger, then actually that's equivalent to one very big risk. And I'm very pleased that that second stage, to just look across the board for those sorts of common triggers, is now part of the policy, and I think it's strengthened for that.
So presumably in that eventuality, you'd effectively merge the risk and do a combined assessment. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
It's so you can understand the totality of the picture rather than looking at them on an individual basis, basically.
Great. Councillor Day.
Yeah, so I think it would come very much into mitigations, like how much action you're going to take to kind of de-risk something. So I think it would lead the council to be more conscious of the need to kind of take risk off the table, because you think actually, I mean, one that I guess I had in mind at the time is if you said, say, building cost inflation, you know, if you have 6 quite significant building projects on at the same time, you might look at one and say, okay, we'll only be X over budget, but actually it could be X times 6. that may then lead the thought that we need to take some additional action because we've actually got 6 of these things on the go, not just one.
Very good point. Any other points from the floor, or can I move to a vote on this? Right, I think we're all happy, and as Claire said, this is effectively an amalgamation of the of Cheltenham Borough Council as was with Cheltenham Borough Homes, and it works, I think, very well as a combined policy. So, can I ask all those in favour to vote for it, and those against also, if they need to? Lovely. I think we had, oh, yes, of course, we're one light, aren't we? Okie dokie, well, that's unanimous from those present. Thank you very much. I'm too busy voting. And so there are no other items that are urgent or require decision tonight. So I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for all for your attendance, and I apologise for the fact that it's 8:15.